Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar Mission in the Neighbourhood. Great to see people entering. Just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded. It'd be great if people could turn on their cameras so we can see you, but if you don't want to, then just keep your camera off. My name's Kathy Ross and I head up the Pioneer training here at CMS. So if you have any technical issues, please contact Jeremy, who is in the chat. Contact him through the chat. What we'd like you to do as you're coming in, would you be able to put one interesting thing about your context or your location into the chat, please? That would help us. It'd be really interesting to see where people are from and what you're up to. Let me just explain to you a little bit about CMS and what we're going to do today. So the people who are presenting today, whom I'll introduce in a moment, we're all part of the teaching team at CMS, where we teach and pioneer mission leadership training. We offer a certificate program through to MA level with accredited through the University of Durham. It's a degree in theology, ministry and mission, and we also offer a doctoral program in partnership with the University of Roehampton. In our teaching, we believe that context is everything. It's very much rooted in lived experience, and we have students from all over the place. We're hybrid and online, and we think that part of the magic of teaching at CMS is our global perspective. We see that as our unique selling point, our USP, that being taught in the context of a mission agency, you get very much a global perspective. To that end, we also have an African focus, an African stream, which Sheila teaches on, and an Asian stream. The Asian stream, by the way, has some bursaries available if you're interested in applying. One of our little mantras, we have a couple of mantras. We talk about the gift of not fitting in. People say that when they come to us, they feel like, yes, at last I can breathe. People get me and know what I'm on about. And we also say that everyone has a piece of the wisdom. We're all learners together. We enjoy learning together. We enjoy being creative and imaginative and innovative. So that's a little bit about us if you're interested in studying with us. And hopefully we'll model a little bit of that today. So just to explain the running order, we've got 3 people presenting briefly. And after their presentations, do put questions in the chat, and we'll go into breakout groups after the presentations, but there's no pressure to go into breakout groups. We know that some people don't like them, so if you don't want to, feel free not to. There's no pressure to join a breakout group, but that'll just be for 5 minutes to have a bit of a buzz, and then we'll come back into plenary and address your questions. So do put them in the chat as we go along. So initially we have James Butler, who's going to be presenting on getting started on Mission in the Neighbourhood. And then we have John Wheatley, then we have Sheila Akamia Conte, who's going to be talking about connecting with new churches in your neighbourhood. And then finally, we have John Wheatley, who'll be talking about connecting with young people in your neighbourhood. And they'll be talking for about 5 minutes each. As I said, do put any questions or comments in the chat. And then we'll have breakout groups and we'll be able to have time for a Q&A afterwards. And do, as I said, put something in the chat about your location and something interesting about your locality and where you come from.
Sorry to butt in, Kathy. People are we seem to have not enabled the chat. So Abby in the background will just do that quickly. You can also put your questions in the Q&A as people have been alerting. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's going to be a struggle if we haven't alerted the chat for you to put things in the chat, so we hope that'll work soon. I was wondering why there was nothing coming up in the chat. Okay, well, I think I'll hand over to you, James. So you're talking about getting started on Mission in the Neighbourhood. Perhaps you could just start by introducing yourself and your role at CMS, maybe one thing that you particularly love about it. I can see the chat's working now, so that's good. So Jerry is by the River Weaver. Enjoy the river, Jerry. Karis is in a over 60s housing block. Um, so good to see people putting things in the chat. Somebody in sunny Cornwall, Lewisham, Sandhurst, welcome. And do feel free to put your cameras on. Oh, somebody from Wales, St David's, lovely cathedral there. Reading, where you are, James. Grove. Great to see people from all over. Thirsk, that might be the furthest away, or maybe Cornwall's the furthest. Europe, from the Anglican Missionary Congregation in Europe, Manchester, welcome Herbert. Great to see people in the chat, Northern Ireland. Okay, James, over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everybody. Really good to be with you this lunchtime. So yeah, I'm James Butler. I have worked at CMS for 8 years and I teach on the MA program here, among various other things. What I love about CMS is the amazing people I get to interact with. I have a diverse and wise collection of colleagues who I love interacting with, but also I really appreciate the interactions with students and their experience and insight. I love hearing about the things that everybody's involved in. Often we hear the big stories of uh, of faith, of what God is doing. And what I love to hear is the stories of local faithfulness. I, I guess they're not small stories, but they're just the untold big stories of faithfulness, of what God is doing in lives and in neighborhoods around the country and around the world. So, yeah, that's a real privilege. And I'm sure there's lots of great stories of God's faithfulness in this webinar today. So I want to start by asking what comes to your mind when you think of mission. Perhaps the first thing is to think about overseas mission, people being sent to unreached people all around the world. Or perhaps when you think of mission, you think of activities taking place from your local church or in your local area. But I want to suggest that a key way to understand mission is to firstly understand it as God's mission, to start by thinking of mission as primarily God's and God's action, and something that we are then invited into. God is a God of mission, and God is active in the world. And just to kind of help us think about that, get our heads into that, I just want to point you to the book of Acts. We often think of the book of Acts in terms of the preaching. But if we think about the book of Acts as what the Holy Spirit is doing, we see how the Holy Spirit leads in mission, and the disciples always seem to be catching up with what God is doing. And one good example of that is Acts 10. In Acts 10, there are two visions from God, one to a Roman centurion called Cornelius, telling him to send for the Apostle Peter, and the other to the Apostle Peter, who has a vision, the conclusion of which is that what God has made clean, he must not call unclean. Just as that vision has finished and Peter is sitting there puzzled, a messenger arrives from Cornelius, and Peter travels with this messenger back to Cornelius's house, and these visions from God bring them together. And a whole series of Gentiles are gathered in Cornelius's house, where Peter has the opportunity, through their questions, to share the good news. The Holy Spirit falls on them, and Peter realizes that God has also chosen them, and they too can be baptized. And so what we see is a God who is active in the world through the Spirit, bringing people to him and inviting people like Peter and Cornelius to participate in what he is doing. And so this is our vision for mission today. And one of our former leaders at CMS, John Taylor, says it this way: mission means finding out what God is doing and trying to do it with him. And I've got a slide just to show you that. So mission is finding out what God is doing and trying to do it with him. And so if that's the case, what does that mean for us as we think about mission in our neighbourhood? And I want to suggest that means that there are particular ways that we need to be in the world, particular approach, a particular posture that this encourages us towards. You may have some immediate thoughts about what that is, and I just want to share 5 ideas briefly about what I think that might mean for us. And I've called those noticing, praying, conversation, naming, and acting. And so in noticing, this means listening to the people around us, friends, colleagues, neighbours, and being attentive to the places that we're in, noticing what's going on. So that is the first question in that posture. What is going on around us? The second is praying. If this is about discerning what God is doing, then listening to God and being attentive to him is also crucial. So I wonder, how does prayer help give us a fresh perspective on the neighbourhood we're in? The third is conversation. Part of trying to work out what God is up to and learning about that is through talking to people, Christians and non-Christians, about what they're hearing, seeing, experiencing, smelling even, all the senses. Because discerning is done in a group. And so here, the question that we might want to ask each other is, what are you seeing? The fourth is naming. And I guess particularly thinking, what does this mean for it to be Christian, a Christian endeavor? And naming means to notice this as what God is doing. So we have the Bible, we have wisdom of many Christians who've come before us. And how do these things help us to understand, to name what we are seeing and experience around us? You might want to name those in terms of words that are more theological, like forgiveness, grace, hope, lament. So that's the question. How does the Bible and the wisdom of other Christians help you name what you're seeing, and what Bible verses and stories might resonate with what you're seeing and hearing? And then the fifth is acting. We need to act out of the posture of noticing, to act out these postures, noticing, praying, conversation, and naming. So the question here is, what could we try out? What could we give a go at in response to those things that we are discerning? This will be available afterwards as a slide to return to, but I encourage you into those postures and not to think of them as somehow some sort of linear thing that you need to do in order, but all things that we need to be bearing in mind and reflecting on as we participate in mission in our neighbourhood. And the last thing I want to tell you about is just a small resource that I'm going to share with you after the webinar is finished, called A Walkabout, Observing and Listening in the Neighbourhood, where you plan a short 30 to 40-minute walk. And then in that resource, there's a series of ideas and questions of things to help you to do that noticing work and that praying work as you go around you. So we'll send that after the webinar, and maybe that can be a starting point for doing some of that noticing, praying, and beginning to have those conversations with people around you. So I encourage you into that, and encourage you to think about what those postures might mean for you as you think about mission in your neighbourhood. Kathy, you're on mute.
How can I be on mute after so many years on Zoom? I like the idea of walkabout. That will resonate with any Australians amongst us, not that I'm from Australia. And I like those points about noticing, praying, conversation, naming, and acting. I think, yeah, those are really helpful. Just yesterday, I heard of a 3-line poem by Mary Oliver. Some of you may have heard of Mary Oliver. She's a really fantastic poet, and especially on nature poems. And the title of the poem is longer than the poem, but it reminded me of those 5 points. The poem is called Instructions for Living a Life, and the poem is 3 lines, 7 words, 3 lines. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. I thought that was kind of another way of saying what you just said, James. James, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it.
Should have said it in 7 words rather than 5 minutes.
Yeah. So thanks. I think that's just a really helpful introduction on getting started, and maybe taking away some of the fear and the mystique of it all. It's actually not that complicated, and to have a go. So thank you. Any questions, do hold your questions or put them in the chat, and you're very welcome to bring them up later in your breakout groups and when we have our Q&A for questions. So Sheila, hand over to you. You're going to be talking about connecting with new churches in your neighbourhood. Maybe you could just briefly introduce yourself, tell us what you do at CMS and one thing that you love about CMS.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And hello to everyone online who has come to join us this afternoon on this discussion. So my name is Sheila. I am based in Glasgow. And at CMS, I'm part of the Pioneer Teaching Team. I teach on the African Christianity stream of our undergraduate route program, if you like it. And in terms of what I love about CMS, what I love most is the diversity, not just diversity in terms of the different gifts of people that we get to interact with as colleagues and as students, but also the diversity of programs that we get to offer, the diversities of theologies that we get to share together and interact daily on a daily basis with. And it's that diversity that we also try to pass along and share through our teaching and through the majority of all our teaching programs. So thank you so much for coming to join us in this conversation. This afternoon, I'm going to be speaking on, we are talking about mission in the neighborhood, and I'm going to be speaking on connecting with new churches, which is an area of research that I am personally involved in, particularly in Scotland. So I'm going to be sharing from some research that I've done recently in Scotland. So I'm going to just share my screen as I've got a presentation to share with you. Okay, so I hope you can see the presentation on the screen. Thank you. Yes, so I've titled this Churches in the Hood. What is God doing in our neighborhoods in terms of new Christian communities and new churches that have arisen that we may or may not know about? And I wanted to start with this question. And this question is based on the scripture, Isaiah chapter 43, the verse 19. And this was a scripture that guided my initial research in 2015 when I started to study new churches. And it's a scripture that says, see, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. So based on that, I wanted us to reflect on this question. What if the answer to revitalizing mission in our neighborhoods is already here, but we are just not looking in the right places? What if God is already at work? And from this scripture, we know that a lot of the time, God is always working. As James mentioned in the beginning, it's God's mission, and we join him in that mission. So God is always working, doing things in the neighborhood. So what if the problem is with us not seeing, as the scripture says, do you not perceive it, and not seeing what is happening? And when I started my initial research in 2015, as I've mentioned, looking into new churches, this was kind of what happened. We were all surprised to find out there was so much happening in the city of Glasgow that nobody really knew about. So what if God is always at work in your neighborhood and you just do not know about it? So current and a lot of the research that is going on in Britain and in many parts of Europe now shows that the landscape of Christianity has shifted. It was shifting, now it has shifted. And based on my research in Scotland, where I'm going to base some of this. So in the last year, in October last year, we launched a new report. I work in Scotland with an organization called Brendan Research. And we did research looking into ethnic minority or diaspora Christianity in Scotland. And we discovered that all over Scotland, there are over 200 new diaspora congregations that have arisen. This ties in with other research that's been done all over Britain. So Peter Briley, who does a lot of church statistics, over 6 years ago also did some research, and he said, actually, there are thousands of new churches, new Christian communities that have arisen in England and Wales and all over Britain. So this isn't a completely new trend. It is what is currently happening. it's also the narrative that traditional and established denominations are declining in numbers. However, diaspora congregations, new churches, and especially African churches are springing up and are growing all over the country. And for us as Christians, whenever new things are happening in society, it's not just physical. So these changes are not just sociological, it's not just demographic, but it is also missional. So we know that God may be at work, maybe up to something, and that we might want to get involved in. So I've also posed this question, and this is also again based on my research, which proposes or highlights that although there's so much going on in terms of new Christian communities in our neighborhoods, sometimes they are very hard to find. Although they are very visible, they are all around us. So there are so many new churches that are, meeting in schools, in community centers, in hotels. Recently, I found one I find so interesting. So in a cinema hall here in Glasgow, churches meeting in homes, on the high street, in industrial units, and almost everywhere. So there are things happening everywhere. And when we look, we are going to see all of these activities. So how many of us pass by a community center or a school in our neighborhood and never realize that perhaps there's a vibrant congregation meeting there every Sunday? So this is just a call for us to just open our eyes to what is really happening in our neighborhoods, especially in the most unconventional places, because new churches would almost always certainly not, be found worshiping in your traditional church buildings, but you find them in these unconventional places where normally you wouldn't expect to find a church. So if you want to connect with new churches in your neighborhood, then these are some of the places to pay attention to and to look. Then why should we connect, or why is it important, as people in mission with God, why is it important to connect with new churches? And I've outlined 3 reasons why it's important to connect with the new things God is doing in our neighborhoods. The first is the missional energy that a lot of these new groups bring with them. So there are many new churches who are very evangelistic. There are so many people, or some people in our societies or in our neighborhoods, that we might struggle to reach, but these new churches are almost not afraid of reaching. So especially when it comes to evangelistic strategies and activities, many new churches are very open. They're the churches or the people you'll find in the marketplace, on the street, on the high street, maybe on a Saturday, preaching or doing evangelism. So they are very missional, they are very evangelistic, and they come with that passion, that new passion and that new fire and energy for mission. So getting together with some of these groups can also help to ignite perhaps our own mission or missional impetus and passion. Again, many of these churches, as I said, are ethnic diaspora congregations, and they come with them many different spiritual and cultural gifts, which our churches and communities can benefit from. And connecting with them are going to help us to also benefit from the gifts, the new gifts that they bring onto the landscape. Again, there are opportunities for reciprocal learning. So there are things that new church communities need to learn about British society and British culture, and we can provide that kind of learning for them. And there are so many things they are doing that are new to our context and to our theology that we can also learn to add on to ours. So there are opportunities there as well for reciprocal learning and networking in that sense. So I've got some examples of practical ways in which we can connect with new church communities when we find them. One of the key challenges for new churches all over Britain is their difficulties in finding places to worship, which is why they are almost always found in the most unconventional of places. So there are opportunities, especially for existing church communities or church denominations that have church buildings or places of worship, to extend a hospitable hand and to offer to share a worship space. So my church here in Glasgow is an African church. We've been here for 25 years. And I think it's only in the last 10 years that we've owned the building. So in the first 15 years of the church's existence, we had to either share or go to a community, find a space in the community to worship. So there are many, many opportunities for sharing space with some of these newcomers who struggle sometimes to find places to worship. We can also do joint worship or prayer gatherings. So connecting with these churches and trying to worship together. I know one African pastor, he actually is with us in CMS, who has testified before that they share a building with an established church. And I think once a month they come together with that congregation just to hold a joint service. And there's so much that comes out of that, and both churches and communities benefit from that. So doing joint worship, joining some new churches just to worship together and to enjoy the gifts that each other brings. Again, many new churches are involved in so many community programs. So food banks, they do a lot of charitable work in the community. So perhaps, if there are things we are also already doing, there are opportunities for us to bring our resources together and to work together to reach the community. Because at the end of the day, the focus is in reaching out to the community. So coming together in joint community projects is also another practical way to connect. Another very simple one, and one that is almost always appreciated by new churches, is just to visit. So I remember my church here in Glasgow, we bought a building from the Church of Scotland, and that congregation had closed down and they had gone to join another congregation, which is just 5 minutes away from where we had gone to settle. And from the time we started worshiping in that church, the minister from the Church of Scotland, just at the bottom of the street, would come to our service every Sunday morning, because we started at 10 and they started at 11. And he would come every Sunday for 1 hour just to come and worship with us and enjoy, the initial part of our worship, our praises, our singing and prayer. And then at 11, he would go to his own church. And that was always greatly appreciated. That helped to create a relationship. Now we've started a new church that is meeting in his congregation. So they are sharing a building from another assembly that we have opened. So just a friendly visit to a new church congregation, it's a key way to open doors and to start to build a relationship that can lead to many missional adventures. And again, invite the leaders or members of new church congregations to your churches, just to also experience what you do, and sometimes just to listen to them and to share ideas. So these are some practical, simple ways in which we can connect with new church congregations and that have arisen or may have arisen in your neighborhood. So just to close, I have this final challenge, and I'll go back and quote from what James shared in the beginning about that definition of mission as finding out what God is doing and trying to do it with him. So mission in the neighborhood isn't just about doing things for the community. It's also about doing with those God has already placed there. So doing with God. So how do we change our strategies and our moves from just doing things to doing things with people and gifts God has already placed on the ground, and with God who already is on the ground and is working. So I challenge you to look again at your neighborhood, open your eyes. There are things happening everywhere. Open your eyes and see who's.
Oh, we seem to have lost Sheila. I thought that was so interesting, and I feel that some of that presentation really meshed quite well with James's talking about noticing and naming and acting. There is an interesting comment in the chat, which hopefully Sheila will come back and we can address later, where Jenny has said, I found it difficult to find details of these new churches. One just started 100 meters from my mother's house. For example, local leadership and contact details are often missing online. And I know some have sprung up and disappeared. And so sometimes it can take some work to find out where these churches are, and needs to be better communication perhaps. So we might address that question to Sheila later when she hopefully returns. But I know it's fascinating to think how many of these churches are in our neighbourhood and in places like Sheila mentioned on her slide, and movie theatres or shop fronts or different places that we may not expect churches to be. And some people have asked if the slides will be available. They will be available, they'll be sent out, and this is also being recorded. So thanks to Sheila. We hope that she will return. And I now hand over to John Wheatley, who's just joined us. John, really great to welcome you. John is going to be talking to us about connecting with young people in your neighbourhood. So John, perhaps you could just start by introducing yourself, your role at CMS, and one thing that you enjoy about working at CMS before you dive in.
Hi, great. It's really good to be here and joining you. I've just come from a breakfast club with young adults. I'm based in West-Supermare on a housing estate. We've been working here with young people for about 15 years. But I work for 1 day a week supporting the youth work program at CMS. So youth workers, children's workers from lots of different contexts, and they're going through our undergraduate pioneer pathway, and I put in a youth lens and do some of the youth work training around that. So that's my role, and I just really enjoy hearing the stories from students that they, something happens at youth club, it's interesting, it's challenging, and they come and bring those back to the classroom. That's always it's inspiring to hear stories, and the whole classroom learn as a result. So I've prepared just a short little piece about how to connect with young people in the neighbourhood. As I said, I'm on an estate, and so much of this is kind of learning that kind of we've tripped up on over the years. So I've got a few slides. I'm just going to share those. Bear with me. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Or you won't know if you can see that. I won't be able to hear you. I'm going to assume that you can see that.
Yeah, we can see them.
Great. So this is just a picture of a nice skate park. But I wanted to think about, I guess, building on the same ideas of how do you connect with young people and do things with young people, and particularly around the idea of journeying alongside young people and with young people rather than doing things to young people, which I think so often happens in youth work and community work. And so I wanted to start with just thinking about how you might connect with different ways you might connect with young people in a neighborhood. And so I got 3 different things that I think we're quite used to in the church, or 2 of them we're quite used to in the church, to think about the different kind of power dynamics that happen when connecting with young people. So, are we doing outreach? Are we doing mobile youth work? Or are we doing detached youth work? And I'm just going to talk some definitions, really. Outreach is often, I've got this megaphone, this idea that we're really finding a way to call people to us. Now, how do we let people know what we're doing in our churches or in our community groups and pull people in? And so you might, take a stand somewhere, or you might go out, walk the park, meet people and say, why don't you come to our youth club? That's outreach. Mobile youth work are some of these amazing projects that maybe go out with a bus, or they spot up a gazebo, but they basically go and set up a little space that is their youth club, but in a kind of maybe a satellite setting. Maybe they run, hot chocolate down the park every Wednesday night. Those kind of projects that are mobile. And then I really want to think about the detached kind of space where it's kind of completely unattached from the power base and the organization that have sent it. So rather than setting up a mini church or setting up a mini youth project that's connected, or about calling people back into their youth project, the detached model is about entering young people's space on their own terms. So like you might enter someone else's house as a guest, and you play by their rules. You sit where they tell you to sit, and someone might say make yourself at home, but that doesn't really mean that you make yourself at home. And that how do we journey with young people on a mutual footing? And detached youth work is a model, a way of thinking about youth work that is about meeting young people in the streets or on the parks, or maybe maybe a football pitch, those kind of around the edges of spaces where it's not organized, and meeting young people in their own space and saying, hi, can we join you? Can we journey alongside you? And that's the type of work we've been doing here in Weston. And we do a bit of this pop-up stuff. We've done kind of serving lunches in the in the summer holidays, but lots of it is just journeying with people, getting to know them, and then out of those things, ideas emerge. So I want to talk to you about, like, if you wanted to do that kind of youth work, what might be some things to think about? And I thought I'd start, or here is a picture. This is our cathedral. We wanted to kind of, how do you bring spirituality into the middle of the space? So as you can see my house in that picture right at the very back there, and then we built this out of broomsticks, and we put up this dome and kind of put up stained glass windows inside, and that was kind of a space of kind of saying, how do you make a holy space in a community? And these children and young people just came in and we told stories. But I wanted to start with this quote from Vincent Donovan. I think it's a really beautiful way of kind of capturing the kind of journeying with young people in faith. In working with young people, do not try to call them back to where they were, and do not try to call them to where you are, as beautiful as that place may seem to you. You must have the courage to go with them to a place that neither you nor they have ever been to before. I think that really captures this missional sense that we have to kind of let go of some of the things that we think are important, or the way that we do things, in order to engage with people who are different, and in this case, particularly young people. And something new will emerge when you kind of mix those things together. So I've got 3 things to think about in terms of starting a youth project in a neighborhood. The first one is really knowing your patch. I think moving into the neighborhood, I think really makes a difference, because you then kind of see it in its ups and downs. You see it when all the professionals go home. At 5 o'clock in our community, all the shutters come down from the shops. Actually, it feels like a very different place at 7 o'clock at night than it does at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I think, like, knowing your space is really important. And this is a project that I was a part of, where again, that kind of like doing things with people rather than doing them to. We asked people not what the problems were in their community, but where was the love? What did they really love about their community? Where were their communities that they felt like they were a part of, where there were people that had a passion that they brought to the community. So this someone hand drew a picture of a neighborhood. It wasn't me. I'm not that artistic. But then everybody had to take little hearts and write things they really loved. And that was just a really good way of kind of getting to know the community, getting to know what people liked. But in terms of starting a youth project, so I would certainly map, like, where are young people welcome? Like, where are the youth clubs? Where are the sports clubs? Just have a sense of where are young people going. And then I would take a sense of where are young people hanging out. And I think a good way of doing that is just walking the streets. Find a partner and just walk the neighborhood, go to the parks, go to the little kind of the quiet bits, the bus stops, and just make a note, in a notebook or a map of, actually we went out Tuesday evening and we saw these young people. You don't need to even talk to them to begin with, just kind of getting a sense of where are people congregating, what is happening around young people in this neighborhood. I think that sets you up in really good stead for starting a youth project, of knowing what's happening. And it's really quite a safe thing to do. You're with someone else. It's quite quiet. There's lots of time to talk. It's really good for building a team. And you just kind of get to know the area, get to know where young people are. Which takes me on to my second piece of advice, which is this is the thing that I think people are most scared about, which is making cold contact. How do you make cold contact with a group of young people in a neighborhood? And I think, actually taking your time and not doing it all at once actually takes a lot of the challenge out of the situation. Because if you've been walking your neighborhood, seeing where people are, and also being seen, actually you're no longer a stranger. I encourage groups to take 3 months, 6 months, just walking the neighborhood, going out once or twice a week, getting to know people. If you've got a dog, walk your dog, be seen. Then actually when it's time to do the introduce each other, exchanging names, actually you're a known face, and that helps. So some tips about making cold contact. Take your time, don't do it all at once. Think about, like, when you go to a conference and you make new friends, what you do in terms of starting a conversation. Usually there's a nod, there's a smile in the queue, long before you get to the point of telling them who you are and what your job is. And so, like, taking that same kind of approach to the neighborhood works. I think this third point down, I think is the most useful thing anyone said to me about starting detached work, which is ask to stay and offer to leave. If you say, "Hi, I'm John, I'm a youth worker. Can I join you for 5 minutes?" You can tell me to go away if you like. They will test the boundary and say, "Yeah, go away, do one." And so you turn around and you walk back out the park that you've just walked into, and I reckon you get 4 or 5 steps away, and the young people say, "No, no, we're only joking." And really what they're doing is they're only testing. And they invite you back in, and you've then got an invitation to stay. They're then saying, "Come and join us." And that really changes the power dynamic in terms of getting to know young people. Don't stay too long. It's definitely the worst thing to be the last person at a party. Stay for 5 minutes, chit chat about the television, the weather, just to tell them what your job is or why you're doing it or what project you're a part of. And then, and get out there before the group get bored. Remember names and come back next week. As I say, do it over time. It takes a long time. Meet lots of different groups. And, you might make a group 1 week. You might not see them again for another month. But if you are committed and you take it slowly and steady, actually you build up really, really strong networks. And people introduce you to others and you kind of build a youth network that is about place, that's not about your club that you own. So that's making cold contact. And my final piece of advice is about getting the level right. I think so often we imagine that, a project's going to go out into a street, meet a young person, and then, there's going to be this kind of incredible relationship, and you're going to be doing activities and sharing the gospel and having deep conversations. And that might be true over a number of years, but it's not true that's going to happen in week 1 or month 1 or maybe even year 1. And this is a lovely model. It's from a book by Richard and Laurie Passmore. I think it's called Here Be Dragons, talking about the stages of youth work and the stages of particularly detached youth work. But they use this model to say, actually, whatever activity, whatever kind of theme you're kind of working with, you can apply at different levels of risk. You can have a kind of a contact risk where you might just have a simple question and answer thing or a little activity to join in. You might have a progress kind of way of bringing the activity, which kind of pushes it a little bit, maybe demands of the young people to give a little bit of themselves, that you maybe do something or they give you some time, or that the question is a bit more involved. And then the real kind of risk-taking level where you're saying, actually, can we push this relationship a little bit further in terms of vulnerability? So you might take it in terms of thinking about youth workout and just in the park. A contact risk might be, just going to, praise the young people that they're playing football, maybe have a kickabout in the park. The progress risk might be saying, actually, can we change this football game up for a basketball? That changes the dynamics. Or can we set different teams up to make it fairer or a different vibe? Or can we play, can we improve our shooting? You take a bit of a risk in terms of progress, but the big risk would be to say, shall we all go and see a football game at the weekend? Let's get the consent forms. Let's take a risk and we'll all journey together. And you don't do the risk thing on week 1. You kind of work your way up to it over time. I think this is a really helpful model of thinking about, actually, where do we pitch the type of activity, the type of conversation we're having, the type of spirituality that we're bringing into this space. And it's not to say that you're about getting it right so that we can work through these. So I think that they're just 3 helpful things to think about in terms of starting a neighborhood project with young people. I mean, I feel like I can't get this far without also talking about safeguarding. So I've got one final slide about detached youth work and safeguarding. Definitely say do this under the auspices of a church or a youth project, or start a community association. Find someone to insure you and kind of hold you. I think that's really important. And there's loads of organizations out there that can provide safeguarding support, and we can signpost you if you want that. But in terms of safeguarding, it's the same policy you always use. So if you're part of the Church of England and you've got a church safeguarding policy, actually you can use that exact same safeguarding policy. It still applies. Just do a detached youth work risk assessment, just like you do a risk assessment for any of your other youth activities in the church. Do one for what are the risks that we're going to encounter in this project. And then just some practical things, work in pairs, don't go out on your own. And have a home base, just have someone at home that you can call back and say, we've been out, we've come back now. Let people know what you're doing. I've put on here the police, but also the schools. When we started, we called around the police, the schools, the community centre, the health centre, the housing office, just told people we're going to be out. And then when there was some concerns for some parents, they'd heard there were these youth workers out, they popped into the school or the housing office, and those people had our backs. They said, oh yeah, it's a new project on this estate. It's really exciting. We really support them. That kind of sorted out any upset in advance. Just carry some things like a phone, a payment method. You never know when buying a packet of chips or a box of chocolates is going to be really useful to you. Just have a few first aid bits in your, in your backpack. I think that's always pretty useful. And keep a notebook. I think that's like remembering names is tough. And keeping a notebook. Oh, we met this group. We'll call them the football group. We met them at the football pitch. There were 6 young people. They were about the ages of 13, 14. These are the names that we remembered. Then it just jogs your memory for next time you go out. So if you meet them, and you can then show that you've remembered their name. That makes a big difference. So yeah, that's my disclaimer. Take some risk with this youth work. I think it's good, but do it within the auspices and safety of a safeguarding policy and procedures. Yeah, I think that's all of it. Were there any questions on the chat, Kathy, that we
Yeah, thanks, John. We're going to go and thank you. That was really interesting, and I think just followed on really well from James and Sheila. I mean, one of the themes that struck me is when you talked about know your patch and where's the love, it's about taking time, not being in a hurry, just taking the time to get to know the area, get to know the people. Thank you. So there are questions in the chat, but we're just going to go into breakout groups for 5 minutes. So Abby or Jeremy will put you in breakout groups of 5 or 6 people just for 5 minutes to have a quick buzz, and then come back and we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll try to finish as near to 2 o'clock as possible for Q&A and plenary. So Abby, if you can put them into breakout groups, and then we'll come back and have Q&A and plenary. John and Sheila, you can look at the chat in the meantime and have a look at the comments and questions. And James, you 3 could have a look. So enjoy your breakout groups. Of course, you don't have to join a breakout group. There's no pressure. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a bit of a buzz in your breakout groups and you've got some questions. I'm going to monitor the questions. I'm actually going to hand over to my colleague James, because unfortunately I have to head off for another meeting quite shortly. So James is going to take over from here. I'll just be around for a few more minutes. But James, I think you've seen some of the questions in the chat. And if you do have a question that you'd like to put to us now, raise your hand or put something into the chat and we'll monitor those. So over to you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everyone. Hope you had good chats in your breakout groups. Do put any questions into the chat, and we'll field any of those as they come. Sheila, have you noticed anything particular in the chat that you would like to respond to? There's a question that there was a question about how do we find the churches that you're talking about. Have you got any tips on finding churches?
Yes. So as I was saying, although these churches are hidden in plain sight, but they can be very hard to locate. One particular factor is the fact that they are very mobile. So because of the unavailability of a permanent place of worship, so one church community can worship in 6 venues in their lifetime. So they are very mobile in that sense. So you may find a church worshiping in maybe the community center, and you may go back and they may not be there. They may have moved on, maybe to pursue another better opportunity for venue or for some other reason. But yes, I think from my initial research, one of the ways that I used to locate new churches was, and John also mentioned this for the youth work, I've called it bus stop connections. So on a Sunday morning, just going out and looking around at the bus stop, you see, or I would see a group of, a family, nicely dressed, and then I'll be like, no, they're going to a church. And it'll be just a matter of, going to say hello and asking, oh, where are you going? Are you going to church? And where is your church, or what's the name of your church? Yeah. So just being very vigilant, opening our eyes to everything that is going on around us in the neighborhood and in the community is just a good way to observe and to find connections. But certainly also approaching community centers. There's one community center here in Glasgow. It's called Woodside Hall. And on a Sunday, there are about 7 different churches worshiping, sometimes at the same time, sometimes some coming in the afternoon or evening. So a very busy hall, community space on a Sunday. Yeah, so just approaching community spaces and maybe asking for information from, the janitor, what's happening at the weekend, what's happening on a Sunday, and you would find a lot of information about some churches that are worshiping there as well. Yeah, so those are just a couple of tips on how
Brilliant. Thanks,
to
Sheila.
find some new congregations.
I love that idea of stalking people at bus stops. There was a helpful question from Alison about, she said, I'm concerned that if we look for where God is working and seek to join in, what about those places where it seems God is not working? And I guess to return to the quote from John Taylor, mission means finding out what God is doing and trying to do it with him, and not assuming that God is working in some places and not in others. And even in those places where it seems that God is not working, I fully believe that he is, and that there are those kind of glimpses. So I would say maybe it's to spend a bit longer there and to work out what God might be saying. And that even in those dark places, it's probably that there are many glimpses of God to be had. John, there was a question to you that I like the look of as well, that said, it's good to find joy in the community or safe spaces, and asking if there are joyous, safe ways that have worked for people. So, I mean, maybe that people want to put things in the chat, but have you got an example of a joyous, safe way that's worked for you?
Joyous for in terms of working in the community. Yeah, I think Halloween is one of the big challenges for churches in communities. That especially at the start of a new worker at the start of the academic year, you've got to decide what you're going to do, and it's one of those challenges about being in the world but not of it. Like, how are you going to engage with it? And so we've started serving hot dogs from the front of the house. So we're not trick or treating and there's no door to knock on, but it means that we are out in the community, because it's when all the families are out of their houses, they all dress up and walk down the streets, and we meet like several hundred people in an evening handing out hot dogs. And I've known to have drive back to Asda to go and buy more hot dogs to keep going. And I think that's been a really joyous way of engaging with something that has felt, quite a challenging space of not wanting to be separate, not wanting to not join in, but also not wanting to join in the traditional way of, handing out sweets. So I found that quite safe and quite joyous, because you're kind of in your own space, and you're not in charge of anything, but you do get to connect with people. That's been really good.
Brilliant. I'm really aware that time is getting away from us very fast. We've managed to respond to a few questions. I think we'll be happy to respond to questions by email beyond this, if you want to. But as we've said, 2 o'clock, we're going to stick to that and fit to that. I can see some helpful questions. Just to flag that some questions have also been answered in the Q&A. So if you put a question in the Q&A, it may well have a written answer to it there. So I want to say thank you to all of you for coming along. This has been a first for us, having a go at this, and so hopefully it's been something that's been helpful and interesting, and we'd love to do more. So look out. Just to remind you that there's a few ways to stay connected with us. We've got some open days coming up, so if you're interested to connect with us and know a bit more about that, do click on the link about open days that I've just put in the chat. You can look more generally at our programs on the website as well. And the other key way to stay in touch with us is through our Pioneer News email, which is a monthly email which comes out with some of the things that are going on, and crucially, the events that are coming up. So future things like this will be there. So do sign up to that email if you want to keep in touch with us. But thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your participation, for joining in the breakout groups, for asking your questions. Jeremy will be sending around an email later in the week with the slides and some other follow-up bits, and do get in touch with any of us if you want to pick up any of the things that have been said or further conversations. We look forward to connecting with you. So thanks, John. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, Jeremy and Abby, and thanks everyone for joining.